We are here today for an advocacy training session, and we're so excited to have you. We just did, it says April 12th on this presentation, which you cannot see, but you will with the recording. And we just did an in-person option yesterday and had such a great conversation and just heard that a lot of folks are really excited about this. And so glad that you all are among that group and want to learn more about this issue. Because it's maybe a little awkward with everyone on the phone, we were initially thinking about doing some introductions with everyone, which we can still maybe attempt to do, but for now we'll just start off. I'm Rachel Sosnochik. I am a public affairs specialist at Second Harvest Heartland. So I handle all of our policy and advocacy work. So both communicating directly with lawmakers and their staff, but also work like this, working with our partner organizations and other folks who share our same goals to try to advance policy that will help end hunger in Minnesota and the whole country, really. So that's me. And again, so great to have you all here. Maren, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for that, Rachel. My name is Maren Guptill. I'm the public affairs intern here at Second Harvest Heartland. So my internship project is based around getting people like you involved in advocacy work and really bringing different stakeholders up to the plate so everyone's voices can be heard. And yeah, that's a little about me.
Great. And Maren, this is the last thing I'm going to say about our technological difficulties. Maren, I can go through the next couple slides. If you want to email folks who registered and let them know about the issues with Teams, and that we'll be sending out more information in a recording later today.
Okay.
Would you be able to do that?
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Quick question. Is it just like, I know we're on the recording. Can other people see us through the phone, or is that?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. They're just audio only.
Okay.
Oh, and Kelly's going to handle the email. Thank you, Kelly. Great. Perfect. Okay, so here's our agenda for today. So we already did introductions of our team, and I'm sure that we will get to know all of you in the future, so can't wait for that. We're going to spend just a bit of time kind of defining what advocacy is, what it can look like. We'll talk a little bit about different hunger relief policies that are out there in Minnesota and kind of what the things that we're working on, and then spend just a little more time diving deeper around legislation here in Minnesota to make free meals available to all Minnesota students, which is something that we're really excited about. We'll go over some of the calls to action, so ways that you can take action on this issue if you are so moved, and then answer any questions. But I'll also say at any point, please feel free to just interrupt us, just chime in, ask questions. When we send out our follow-up information, please, respond and reach out that way if that's your preference. We want to make sure that we are doing everything we can to make this, as easy to understand for you, and just answering, any questions that you have. So please don't hesitate to do that. And before we dive into that agenda that I just laid out, we want to just spend a couple minutes grounding this session in the mission of Second Harvest Heartland, which probably, if you were all volunteers and have worked with us before, you've heard this or seen this at some point, but our mission is to end hunger together. And we're a hugely effective and efficient food bank, and we have, we really take seriously our role in the food system and the responsibility that we have to help people in need. And not only are we using all of the resources at our disposal to get food out to those facing food insecurity, but we also recognize that we have to move beyond food distribution if we truly want to end hunger, which again is our mission, is why we're here. Emergency food is important. That's always going to be a part of the work that we do and really critical to our day-to-day here at Second Harvest Heartland. But We also need to be focused on providing pathways to longer term supports through federal nutrition programs, as well as addressing some of those systemic root causes of hunger. So that's, a little bit of a new direction for us. Just thinking about the whole span of our organization, but it's something that we're really excited about. One of the stats that we talk about a lot, and maybe you've heard it, maybe you haven't, but it relates to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, otherwise known as SNAP. This is a monthly grocery benefit that helps bolster family food budgets. So you just get it on a debit card. It works just like a debit card. And it has a lot of reach here in Minnesota. So over 440,000 Minnesotans participate in SNAP, which is a huge number of people. And it's, understandably that number has gotten larger during the pandemic. But not only does SNAP have this huge reach, but it's incredibly efficient. So this is the stat that we say all the time. So for every meal we provide as a food bank, SNAP provides 9. So just last year, Second Harvest Heartland provided 107 million meals to people just within our service area, which is central, southwestern Minnesota, and a little bit of western Wisconsin. 107 million meals is just what we did. SNAP, you can do that math. SNAP provided over 900 million. We're never going to have the same reach that a program like SNAP does. That's just not an efficient use of resources. And so we need to be, alongside the food distribution, we need to be connecting those who are eligible with programs like SNAP, like school meals, which we'll talk about in just a minute. So this is, again, really critical to our mission to end hunger together. And that's why we're here today, to talk about where does policy fit into that, and how can you all fit into that same advocacy work to make these programs work better for people and connect people with these resources. So now I'm going to pass it off to Marin.
Thank you, Rachel. So first off, we're going to start with some defining and grounding of what advocacy work is, because that looks different and means something different to everyone. So here at Second Harvest, if you want to go to the next slide, that I know you guys can't see, but I can see. This is like a fun podcast, like a little different route. But yeah, so here at Second Harvest Heartland, we advocate for and fight for hunger fighting policies and programs. So that means we work with state and federal legislators and networks to ultimately pass policy and legislation that's goal is to end hunger. So that could look like a couple different things. This here is our CEO, Allison, with the Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack. He has championed a lot of hunger fighting policy throughout the years, used to be on the board of Feeding America. So this is someone deeply engaged in our mission. And we do these kinds of visits pretty often, so policymakers can actually see on the ground the work that we do. And next slide. So why is advocacy work important? That's kind of the overall question, right? Policy work is the way that we get policymakers to hear our voice. Policy is complicated, and it's complicated on purpose. It oftentimes discourages people from getting involved. And so our job here today is to make these really complicated processes understandable for everyone so that we can level the playing field and make sure that all people's voices are being heard. Making voices heard is truly the most important part of advocacy work. Legislators need to hear directly from the people who are being affected. And that's us, right? They represent us, they're representatives so that we can share our stories and ensure that our voices are the most important things driving their decisions. So now that we've done some defining, let's get into the actual policies on the table here.
Great, thank you, Marin. So yes, as Marin said, we talked a little bit about why we advocate, how that connects to our mission, why advocacy is important, and a little bit of kind of how it works. So we want to talk more about the types of hunger relief policies that Second Harvest Heartland and our many partners across the state are advocating for and the things that we're talking about this year. And we're going to do that by talking about a coalition called Minnesota Partners to End Hunger. So this is a wide-ranging coalition. It's a lot of nonprofit organizations, folks with more of a statewide presence like Second Harvest Heartland or Hunger Solutions Minnesota. There's also a lot of really small, nonprofit food shelves operating in really small towns in greater Minnesota or focusing on very specific communities, here in the metro area. There's also folks like the Department of Human Services who oversees the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program that I just talked about. And so it's great to have their view and perspective as we're thinking about, what are our policy opportunities to support folks facing hunger. The Minnesota School Nutrition Association, so folks that are running school nutrition programs are also there at the table, sharing their perspective and what they would like to see happen. So it's a really great coalition and just brings a lot of different folks together, but all who have a shared purpose and a shared goal. And that's really the power of coalitions. It's a really important way that we advocate is through this type of coalition work. Because as Marin said, the policy process is often very confusing. It is not always easy to understand, and it can take a lot of time and resources and influence and relationships and all of these things to make policy change happen. Even if for everyone, that's here today, it seems like a no-brainer that we would want to pass policy that feeds more people. That's not always the case when it comes down to actually trying to get that policy passed. And you need to do a lot sometimes to convince legislators to make this a priority. And so coalitions help spread the work of changing policy amongst, a bunch of different people, and again, kind of unites everyone towards the same goal. So we are going to talk just a little bit about the 2022 Minnesota Partners to End Hunger legislative agenda. So we've got a few different things to talk through. The first is investing in hunger-free schools. And this is something we're going to dive into in just a few minutes here. So I'm just going to kind of leave it at that for now. So that's an item on the list. We saw during the pandemic, a lot of food shelves realized that they needed, additional capacity and just infrastructure. They needed capital improvements, things like refrigerated trucks or freezers and coolers in their food shelf, or even just more money to get more food to feed the increased number of people who were visiting food shelves over these last couple of years. So there's some legislation on the table this session to help them get that type of funding that they need and make those changes and improvements. Things like expanding access for more low-income Minnesotans to access SNAP. So the way the income eligibility for SNAP right now is still pretty low. And we know in Minnesota, 40% of people experiencing food insecurity aren't actually eligible to participate in SNAP. And so there's legislation again here in Minnesota to bump that eligibility up a little bit so that more people can participate in the program. Things like farm to school are housed under Partners to End Hunger, so connecting food from local farmers with schools, but also early care settings, so childcare, like daycare centers and preschools and things like that, allowing them to access funds to support that type of work. And then also legislation around meal delivery to veterans. So that's championed primarily by Meals on Wheels, which maybe a lot of folks here are familiar with. I think they're a pretty familiar name. And so doing some work to support them. And that's a lot of different things that I just covered. I would say the main takeaway, the main thing to remember is that there's sort of two categories of policies that we will try to support. And the first is going to be policies or programs that support food banks and food shelves and other, meal providers to do our work more effectively and reach more people, right? That emergency food piece is always going to be important. But then also when we think about the school meals policy and the SNAP policies, those are things that directly benefit people facing food insecurity. That doesn't really have a lot to do with how the emergency food system works. So those are kind of two separate things, but again, working towards the same goal of ending hunger here in Minnesota. So that's a little bit about the Partners to End Hunger agenda. Do any folks have questions about any of the policies I just mentioned? And I'll just take silence as no, there are no questions.
And feel free to use,
Great.
well, can they use the chat?
I cannot use the chat, Maren.
Okay,
Nope.
all right.
I
Well,
know. So yes, you'll just have to unmute yourself when you do have a question. So yes, so I will also say, we're focused, the rest of the day is going to be really focused on free meals for all students and legislation that'll help us do that. But if any of these other policy issue areas sound especially interesting to you, or maybe you feel more excited and passionate about one of these other options and not as much about free meals for Minnesota students, that's totally fine. And like, let us know, because we're starting with child hunger, issues related to child hunger, because that's what most people have expressed interest in some surveys and focus groups that we've done in the past that Maren will talk about in a minute. But any type of advocacy you want to do on any of these issue areas is going to be amazing, and we're happy to support it however we can. So just make a note of that too, if one of these is more your speed. So now the time is here to put the spotlight on school meals for all legislation. And this, it's a really exciting time to be talking about this policy because there's been a lot of excitement and enthusiasm for it among pretty much everybody who is at all impacted by school meals, whether it's the nutrition professionals providing the meals, whether it's the students receiving the meals or the parents of those kids. I don't know. I assume folks on this call have kids or know someone who has kids or have grandkids that are in school. And really everyone is realizing that this is the way to go, because as you may know, we've had free meals for all students in place for these last 2 school years due to the pandemic. I think, so the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which oversees this school meal. Hello, thanks for joining. So the USDA, who oversees school meal programs, realized that with the pandemic and all the ways that it has changed how schooling has looked, the last thing that people should be worried about was whether or not they were going to get fed at school, or how they were going to be providing, how they were going to be providing the meals, how they were going to be collecting eligibility data and forms to make sure that only people who qualified for school meals got it. That was just all very complicated and burdensome. It is complicated and burdensome, and always has been. And so the USDA realized, like, that's not going to work for people right now. We just need to focus on feeding as many kids as we can. So we've had free meals for all students for these last 2 years. And now that we're at a point where there's talk of transitioning back to how things used to be, people are just wondering why we would do that, because it wasn't working before. No, it was complicated for schools and families alike. And most importantly, it was leaving way too many kids facing food insecurity without access to nutritious food at school. And so that's really why there's been this momentum building, this legislative session to do something about it and try to keep this policy in place. It's something that was included in the governor's supplemental budget, and I won't go too much into detail about the budget process. We can save that for another conversation, another training session, perhaps. But as you may have heard, Minnesota has a huge budget surplus. We have an extra $9+ billion that a lot of folks are calling on the legislature to invest in additional programs and services, or strengthen existing programs and services for folks in need. And the governor released his proposed supplemental budget which is basically him saying, this is how I would want to spend, this $9 billion, and included free meals for all students as a part of that budget, which has been really exciting because we've had now, because of that, because they sort of set the stage, we've had a lot of great conversations with legislators from across the state, from both parties, about this policy, and had some hearings in the House Education Policy and Finance Committees, where we also saw bipartisan support, and again, just a lot of stakeholders coming together in favor of this. And so that's been really exciting. And that's a huge shift. I mean, even 2 years ago, free meals for all students was like a total daydream. Like maybe one day, in 20 years we could get there. So to see the really rapid shift in how folks are thinking about this has been really exciting. And that was a really, I can't underscore enough how monumental it was for Governor Walz to include this policy in his supplemental budget. So that was really exciting. I will say, as we're nearing the end of the 2022 legislative session here in Minnesota, free meals for all legislation was not included in either the House education budget bill or the Senate education budget bill. So there's still a ways to go in making this a priority for legislators. And that's really why we're here doing these trainings with you all. And we'll be doing, having a lot more conversations about this in the months to come, so that legislators know this is something that their constituents care about and are tracking and want to see movement on, because it's a big deal. And there's nationwide traction for this. We're seeing 8 states, including Minnesota, have state level legislation to pursue this. There's federal legislation to make this happen. California and Maine have already made this happen, so that it will continue on past the pandemic. So there, like I said, there's a lot of momentum, a lot of traction. This is the time is now. The time is very ripe to make this change. So we are all working as part of another coalition called the Hunger Free Schools campaign. You might see that in a lot of the different resources we'll send out. But so it's another coalition, and all of the coalition members. We've got businesses, healthcare organizations, nonprofits, education partners, youth organizations, all these different folks who are all uniting in favor of this legislation and all trying to bring their supporters and their folks along with them. So this is, Second Harvest Heartland trying to do our part and mobilize people like yourselves who are already doing so much to help us in our mission to end hunger, and trying to bring you along in this way as well. So very exciting. And now I'll pass it back to Marin.
Thank you, Rachel, for giving us all the inside scoops on the policy piece of it. I'm going to speak a little bit more towards the benefits and why this legislation is so important. Like Rachel mentioned, throughout the pandemic, so for the past 2 years, universal school meals has been a reality throughout our country, and we have seen an incremental increase in participation in lunch. So more kids are eating at school, more kids are eating together, and there isn't as many kids falling through the gaps, which is really why this legislation is so important and why the 3-tiered free lunch, reduced lunch, full price lunch no longer is a reality that works for us here. 1 in 4 kids who are experiencing hunger don't qualify for free school meals. So that income eligibility really just isn't realistic, especially with all of the economic impacts that we've seen of this pandemic. More and more people are becoming food insecure, and that income eligibility just isn't realistic anymore. Additionally, of the kids that do qualify, 1 in 5 don't actually receive the benefits because the application process is so complicated. Like I mentioned, that 3-tiered system makes it so a lot of people can't even access these benefits, whether that's because, trying to, like Rachel mentioned, getting records of income or getting the application sent in, or fear of, participating in these programs could impact, it could impact a lot of things. People have fear about it affecting their eligibility for other programs. And the biggest barrier is, we're relying on children to be the communicators between parents and schools. If you have a kid, or you know people with kids, or have ever spent time around children, you know that as soon as that slip goes in the backpack, it's gone. And we shouldn't be putting the weight of something as important as being fed at school on children. Additionally, it adds so much extra stress for the administrators. These people need to be focused on feeding the next generation and not on filing federal paperwork, because it just adds so much extra weight. And we know that that education workers have really gotten the short end of this stick throughout the pandemic. They have worked tirelessly to make sure that our kids are educated and fed. And the last thing they need to be worried about is filing paperwork so that they can do their job as well. So that's really the practicality piece of it, and why we need to make sure that the kids that are falling through the gaps have equal opportunity and access to food. And along with all of the reasons why it's not realistic, there are so many benefits that we have seen by feeding children in schools. Our mission here at Second Harvest is to end hunger. And the easiest way for us to end childhood hunger is by feeding kids at school. We can't control what happens at home, but we can control what happens in the classroom. So this is a surefire way to make sure kids are getting 2 solid meals a day. That's a really crucial first step in ending childhood hunger. Additionally, fed kids are healthy kids, and healthy kids learn better. According to a study done during the pandemic by Syracuse University, schools that fed their students for free had learning achievement gaps that were 6 to 10 weeks ahead of schools that didn't. And that's research coming out of California and Maine, like Rachel had mentioned, who has already passed this legislation. And so we're seeing that kids are learning more, and they're learning better, more efficiently when they're fed. Not only are kids learning better, but there has been an increase in attendance. There's been a decrease in behavioral issues in these schools, because, hangry students can't learn. Hangry people can't learn. So there's just an overall kind of enhancement of learning and achievement with students when they're properly fed. Another major benefit that I really want to call attention to is the elimination of the stigma that's associated with receiving free meals. I was a kid who received free meals all throughout my childhood education. And I remember from such a young age what it felt like to be divided by class by such a young age. And that is so detrimental to development. Those titles carry on throughout people's lives. And this is especially important when we know that Black and Brown students are much more likely to experience food insecurity and stigmatization because of that. So school meals for all really levels the playing field so that everyone can access something as basic of a human need as food, right? It's dated, and it's almost mind-blowing to think that we would divide children as young as 6 years old by class just because of their parents' income level. Like I said, that really carries on into people's lives, and putting that narrative on young children can affect so many different things. And like I had mentioned, not only is that social solidarity there, but more people are using it because it's free. My little sister goes to Mounds View High School, and she sent me a Snapchat, if you guys know what that is, of all of the kids in the lunchroom that were eating breakfast together. And when I tell you the room was packed, I mean packed. I mean hockey kids with band kids and everyone coming together to really share a meal. And that's what school is supposed to be about, you know, coming together as a community to learn and thrive and share a meal together. So it was really, really empowering to see that play out in real time and to see the potential that this policy could really have. So that's kind of an overview of all of the benefits. And this is really so local to our communities here. You know, I'm seeing it in my family. We have talked to parents, board members, and I want to read a quote from Jessica Eliason. I'm sorry if I butchered that pronunciation, but she is the board chair at White Bear Lake Area School. And she says, "We were able to get access to meals for our 6-person family, and it relieved a lot of stress, which was incredibly helpful for our family and finances. If the system shifts back to the way it was before the pandemic, we're not eligible for free and reduced lunch. So I think we really need to consider how we're thinking about feeding our children and families." This is coming right from our community members, our parents, our board chairs of our schools. This is really something that affects everyone here in Minnesota. And that's why it really needs to be a top priority, not only for us to advocate for, but for legislators to champion and pass through. So now that we know why this is so important, we're going to talk a little bit about what to do next, right? We can all agree that kids should be fed in school. So how are we going to make this a reality here in Minnesota, and where do you guys come in? So
we are, oh, sorry, I was skipping ahead, Marin.
good.
It's still you.
Okay. Yeah, so like Rachel mentioned earlier, we had a survey not too long ago, last spring, where we surveyed volunteers like you guys, donors, to see where you guys were at with advocacy work, how interested, what it meant to you, and how we could help people get involved. And we saw over and over again, like Rachel mentioned, that childhood hunger was the #1 priority, the most important issue for volunteers and donors. And that you folks wanted training sessions like this to help people speak on issues, informative guides to explain and share. My favorite quote when it comes to advocacy work is that there's a million excuses to not get involved, but there's 1,000,001 benefits to making the change you want to see. So that's why we're having this training session. That's why we're starting all of these initiatives to really bring you guys in on something that impacts all of us, and making it not only accessible, but understandable. And so with that, let's get into what we have for you guys. And Rachel's going to speak really quickly on why all of these things are meaningful, because I know in the past 2 years, when we've seen really this uptick in advocacy work, filling out petitions and doing these things can feel sometimes unimpactful, but we're here to explain why these things are really important, and why, you know, one voice or one petition or one postcard can really make that difference between kids being fed in school and not. So with that, Rachel.
Yes. Thank you so much, Marin. So the first thing that I want to say, and we have a a list of options that ways that you can get involved that Marin's going to go through, but I want to provide just a little bit of kind of context and background to explain how these different things are effective. And the first thing I'll say is that we're already a little bit ahead of the game, purely because we're focusing on state level advocacy. And things aren't always a slam dunk, but when we're having people reach out, even if it's, 5 or 10 people reaching out to a state representative or a state senator, that's going to make much more of an impact versus when we're having 5 people send an email or tweet at their representative or senator serving in Congress, right? Just because those representatives and senators represent way more people, right? Think about Senator Tina Smith and Senator Amy Klobuchar. They represent the whole state. 5 people is like a little drop in the bucket. Whereas, what we know from talking with our legislators here in Minnesota who represent, much smaller districts, if they get 5 or 10 emails about one specific issue, that really stands out to them. That brings it to their attention and they think to themselves, oh, wow, like clearly this is something people are paying attention to. I should pay attention to it too. Like it really is that easy sometimes. They just, with hunger relief policies specifically, it is very rare that legislators at any level are like super vocally against the work that we do and the policies we're advocating for. I think a lot of that is just like morally, it's the right thing to do. But I think also politically, it doesn't look good when someone is like, talking about how we don't need to feed more people and everyone's fine. I think that doesn't always play well. What the challenge that we face, and really again what we need to try to mobilize folks to fight against, is that hunger relief is also very rarely a top priority for legislators, right? There's so many competing needs and interests out there. And so hunger relief programs can kind of just get put on the back burner. It's like, whatever, it's fine. I'm not against it, but I'm not going to do anything to move the needle forward. And so, and we can get folks, even a small number of folks, to take action and again, raise the awareness of their representative, their state representative or state senator, that can go a long way in making this a priority. I do want to say one thing specific to social media, because I think, and I get this way sometimes too, where I think about like social media advocacy is like not real, air quote, real advocacy. But what's so interesting, again, because this is state level policy, when you tweet at or like tag your state representative or senator, because at this point they pretty much all have, they have social media accounts across all the platforms. That's a direct line to those elected officials. They don't have a staff person like running their Twitter account, for instance. It's them. And so when they are getting, again, 5, 10, 15 people who tag them in a tweet about free meals for all students, it's like, oh, wow, like clearly people care about this. People are paying attention and they see that directly. There's no like filter. There's no like third party that's kind of mediating that. It's a direct interaction. And so that can actually be a really powerful way to connect. As well as maybe the more traditional things that we think about with like phone calls and writing a letter or things like that, petitions. So social media can be a really powerful tool as well. You'll see when we send our follow-up email, and we'll have links to a bunch of different things. We're really trying to strike a balance here between making different types of advocacy actions really easy, and they won't take a ton of time. So we're trying to provide like the tools and talking points and messages and things like that for you, social media graphics, all of that stuff. But we also want to try to give a good amount of flexibility so that you can personalize your message and speak to what is most meaningful to you or why you really care about this issue. We don't want it to be so cookie cutter that you're just like copying and pasting and that's it. Because again, when we talk to our volunteers and donors about a year ago, on advocacy, they told us like, I don't want to just do, copy paste stuff. I want to take action that resonates with me and feels meaningful to why I care about, the mission of Second Harvest Heartland. So that's the balance we're trying to strike. So you'll have to give us feedback in the future, after you've gotten a chance to look through some of these resources. We'll definitely ask you how we're doing with that. And the last thing I'll say before Marin kind of runs through this list, and before you see it in your inbox, it's like I would say it's a long list, but we have 6 different ways you can take action. And I don't want anyone to feel pressured to do all of these things. If you are super excited and maybe you're retired and you're like begging for things to do and you want to do all of these things, then that's amazing and great. And we would love that. But if you have 5 minutes, like one time, and you can like sign a petition and like send a tweet, that's also amazing and helpful. So I just want to make it really clear that anything you do is helpful and serves this greater purpose, right? Because we're just trying to get as many people as possible involved, and everyone's going to choose to get involved in a different way. So just do what feels right, do what you have time for, and what's reasonable with your current schedule. And with that, I'll let Marin kind of walk through some of these different options. And again, you'll get all of this in your inbox with links and things. So, but for now, just we'll give you a little bit of an overview.
Rachel, one time you called it armchair advocacy, and I really liked that term. I thought it was really, really visual. But I do want to say that some of those things that feel easier do still have a really big impact, especially on the state level. I know with petitions, like I mentioned, they have felt kind of like you said, armchair advocacy, like they don't make a huge impact. But when legislators see that, 50 people or 500 people in this community here today really care about this issue, it has a lot of weight to know that that many people care about this. And so don't mistake them for being unimpactful, because really these things make a difference. So we will be sending out a petition that is part of the Hunger Free Schools campaign that is urging legislators to, fight for this policy. So that is that in terms of petitions. We also will be sending out our advocacy e-newsletter list. So if you're not already on that, please sign up. We'll be sending out updates in terms of policy, event, all of those good things. I'm sure some of you are already on that list, considering that you're here today. So thank you for getting on that. We also will, Rachel mentioned a little bit about social media and why that's important. So we have a toolkit on social media. It's a Google Doc or a Google Drive, which has different messaging and materials that you can share on different platforms. During our session yesterday, we had a couple folks express interest in having a social media training session to get some folks that aren't as familiar with how to use social media kind of have access to that platform, which is really, really exciting. So stay tuned for more information about that. We're always happy to, like Rachel said, use the platform that feels comfortable for you, but we love to help people expand the ways that they can get involved, because it's easier than you think, I swear. I know Twitter may sound scary, but it is a really, really good way to get your voice out there, get involved, keep up to date with policy, those types of things. Another really, really important way to help our work here, which most of you know, since most of you are already volunteers, but signing up for volunteer shifts, bringing a friend helps us get our work done. And most importantly, I think most importantly, coming up on April 26th, we are going to be having a letter writing session. So that will happen in person at Brooklyn Park, or in Brooklyn Center at our Second Harvest facility. We'll have snacks. We'll all sit down and write letters to our legislators. And you can kind of highlight what was most important to you. Receiving a handwritten letter is a really, really important and impactful way to make your voice heard. Getting just a couple handwritten letters. I know anytime I get even anything in the mail, that's like, it's a game changer. I only get them from my grandma, but legislators love getting handwritten letters and hearing directly why this matters to you. And you can kind of, like I said, highlight why this matters to you. And we will also be having an online option. I swear we will figure out some more of the technological issues before that one. So we won't have these type of complications, but I appreciate you guys bearing with us through this today, despite the technological difficulties. So those are the next steps that we have for you folks. And we look forward to seeing you at different events and sharing more information. Like Rachel said in that follow-up email, we would drop it in the chat, but that's not an option right now. So I want to take some time to have any questions answered. Yeah, we have about 5 minutes left. So yeah, I really want to open the floor up, have an open conversation. Yeah. And feel free to just, yeah, there's no chat function. So feel free to just, you know.
It is a lot of information to process though. So also totally fine if folks are still in that stage of absorbing all of the knowledge, and we'll have questions later on. That works just as well. Alrighty.
This is Mary, and I just wanted to let you know that this was a really nice program. I'm working on some advocacy for nurse practitioners, and it's nice to have what we're doing reinforced with what you're doing on this end, because we do a lot of work with homelessness and food insecurity for kids as well as older adults. And it's really neat to see those programs intersect for me. So thank you for having this program today.
Yeah,
thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thanks for joining us too. And we hope that this information can transfer over to different networks. No matter what there's a lot of intersection, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I think it's very easy to do a lot of what you were saying is armchair advocacy. I love that term, because it takes about 10 minutes to make a phone call or write a letter, and that's just as crucial and critical as it is to go up to your senator's or representative's office. So this is a really neat way to let a lot more people access that advocacy channel, just by, helping them learn how to write the letter or learn how to do the phone call or even send an email, so really neat. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I've heard a lot of former legislative staffers, both at the state level and at the federal level, say that they literally keep a tally of every phone call they get in favor or against a specific policy, or every email they get, every letter they get. Like, they are literally tracking that with like tally marks. So yeah, when we say that, like, it really does matter if we can mobilize even a small number of people in favor of these things, that that can make a big difference. So, and you're right, Mary, it's usually pretty easy, but we're here to help make it even just a little bit easier for everyone, especially folks who maybe don't do as much of this or haven't done any of this in the past.
And Mary, I'm sure you've discovered in your work that when you do contact your local representatives, they're just community members. They're just parents and school teachers and people that live next door. So kind of breaks that barrier down between, constituents and representatives.
It sure does. And I always laughed when I used to teach at the U. I used to send my students out to talk to their local representatives because they were from all over the state. And they'd go out and have coffee together on a Saturday morning, and they'd come back and report that, oh, this was so nice. I was so afraid before, but once I met them, they were just like me. And I think that's a real critical message, that they put their pants on the same way I do, So,
I love that. That's such a, yeah, that's another good visual. That's fun.
Mhm.
Great.
Alrighty, folks. Well, we are right at our 1 o'clock end time. Again, thanks for bearing with us. We'll have the recording and slide deck sent out to you so you can peruse those in your own time. And also just links to the different resources that we've put together. And hopefully we'll see you in a couple weeks, or anytime. Reach out if you have questions. We definitely want to hear from you. So thanks again. Alrighty, I'm gonna end our recording and then we're gonna